Hello everybody, I'm Richard Holdner, and as always, welcome to the channel. Today, here's the question. What happens if I have an LS motor and I want to put a cam in it? But later on, what happens if I want to add nitrous? Do I need to put in a dedicated nitrous cam? What happens if I want to add a blower? Do I have to have a dedicated blower cam? What happens if I want to add a turbo? Do I have to have a dedicated turbo cam? The answer is no. Just pick the camshaft that you want. I'm going to show you what happens when we put a Brian Tooley Racing Truck Norris camshaft in. I'm going to show you what happens when we ran it naturally aspirated. I'm going to show you what happens when we added nitrous. I'm then going to show you what happens when we added a blower. And finally, what happens when we added a turbo. Guess what? That cam works with everything. And so does really every other. Have you ever been walking or running around your truck and had this happen? You know what? You deserve a cam. Here's what happens when we run the low buck truck cam. Here's what happens when we run the Truck Plus cam. And here's how the two cams compare. Order now at richardholdnerperformance.com. Okay, let's get started in our effort to show you what happens when we add nitrous to a cammed motor and when we add boost from a blower to the cam motor and then boost from a turbo to the cam motor, just to show you that the camshaft basically is just a starting point, and then everything else either adds or multiplies on top of that. And if you want a different power curve, you just pick a different NA camshaft and then add boost to that or add nitrous, and all of that works out well. So we're going to start out with our 4.8 liter. This particular one was an LR4. We had used it a lot of times for various testing. It was an LR4, but it had Gen 4 rods on it, and it had, we had upgraded the piston to, it was like a 5/over JE, very small dome forged piston, because we had damaged this motor in the past. So we ran this with the stock camshaft, the stock 706 heads. It even had stock springs on it when we ran the this is the NSR version of the Brian Tooley Racing Truck Norris camshaft. And we did a comparison between the 500 lift NSR version and the 550 lift standard version of their Truck Norris camshaft. They're good camshafts. And there was very little power. It's 6 or 7 horsepower between the change and lift, basically between those two camshafts. But we ran this combination for our nitrous test. We ran it with the stock truck intake manifold and throttle body. We had engine 7/8 long tube headers on it. We had bigger than stock injectors on it. We had 36-pound injectors in it. We ran it with a Holley HP management system, as we normally do, and Mazir electric water pump on the engine dyno, the way that we configure it. And run in this manner, our combination produced 327 horsepower on the 4.8 liter and 337 foot-pounds of torque. Pretty typical when you're running the stock camshaft in these things. They make more torque than they make horsepower, even on the 4.8 liter. Here's what happened when we swapped out the stock cam for the Brian Tooley Racing Truck Norris NSR cam. I'll go ahead and put the specs up here. As you can see, down near 500 lift, which allows us to use the stock springs, 212, 220 something duration, and 107.5 degree lobe separation angle. And once we put that camshaft in the 4.8 liter, naturally the power jumped up quite a bit to 375 horsepower. Peak torque was also up to 352, 353 foot-pounds of torque. So here's the interesting thing. Here's what happens when we added a small shot of nitrous to it. And this was, to give you an idea, this was a Zex wet kit, typical of these kinds of things, from whether it's a Sniper kit or a Nitrous Express or whatever. Basically, you're just plumbing the nitrous and the fuel together into a single fogger nozzle and then injecting that into the intake manifold. We ran a 54 nitrous jet and a 32 fuel jet. And here's what happened when we ran our combination. You can see, as expected, we ran the nitrous on this thing, activating it at about 4,500 RPM, it looks like, and carrying it out to like 6,500 RPM. The peak power jumped up to almost 500, 499 horsepower, like right at 500. The spike in the peak torque was 532 foot-pounds. So you see it was quite a bit lower than that. But this is what happens. If you were to add this nitrous to a stock cam, it would add this much power. If you add it to a different cam, it will add this much power, because this is what happens when you add nitrous. If you want more power, then you put a camshaft in it that makes more power to start out with, and then you add this much power to the more NA combination, and you make more power. Let's take a look and see what happens when we add a blower. Okay, now that we've shown you what happens when we run nitrous on a truck Norris cam, let's take a look and see what happens when we run boost from a supercharger on a truck Norris cam. This was a little different engine configuration. This was actually an all aluminum 5.3 liter and L33 that I got from the wrecking yard. We've used it for a ton of different testing, and the combination has always worked very, very well, and including when we ran the blower on here. But we started out with the thing the way that I got it from the wrecking yard. So it was an all stock, all aluminum 5.3 liter. That combination had flat top pistons from the factory. It had 799 heads on it. It had the early truck intake manifold and throttle body. We ran it on the dyno the way that we normally do. 1 7/8 long tube headers, collector extensions, the Mazir electric water pump, no accessories, obviously nothing on the throttle body. And then an optimized tune using a Holley HP management system. And here's what happened when we ran the motor naturally aspirated with the stock camshaft. 365 horsepower and 389 foot-pounds of torque. So it did well. And then it's continued to perform with 500 or 600 pulls on it already. Here's what happens when we put the Brian Tooley Racing Truck Norris camshaft in here. Power picked up quite a bit, 425 horsepower-ish, you can see, and 415 foot-pounds of torque. So it did very well, and it did you saw similar kind of gains when we added the NSR version of that truck Norris cam to the 4.8 liter. And then here's what happened to show you that, hey, look, this camshaft also works well with boost. When we added a supercharger, here's what happened when we added a blower to this combination. And what we did was, using the Tom Demuse from Demuse Engineering, he did an adapter setup for us, and we were able to put in this case, it was a Ford Racing blower from a Coyote application, but the adapter plate setup was designed to run one of the Ford GT500 blowers from the Ford side on the LS, and using an adapter plate and a Holley high ram or low ram manifold. And then we put the blower on there, and I did a few tests with this. We ran gas, we ran E85, I ran it with a few different throttle bodies, and you can see the combination worked well. And you can look, even though we changed the intake manifold design on this from the factory long runner stuff to a short runner Holley, we still had really good power production. And really what we're trying to illustrate here is that with this camshaft, even though a stock camshaft or this truck Norris camshaft was not designed specifically as a blower camshaft, they just work. They work with nitrous, they work with a supercharger. Run with this blower, we made 677 horsepower and 693 foot-pounds of torque. And there's way more left in this blower. This 2.3 liter blower could support a lot more power if we ran, a whole bunch of boost. But that really wasn't the idea behind this test. We just wanted to show, hey, on that particular test, we just want to show, hey, look, here's what the adapter setup is. You could put these kinds of blowers on there, and it works well. You can run a Ford blower on an LS, and all that works fine. So now let's take a look and see our final test and show that you can run this camshaft, and it also works with a turbo. Okay, by now, you should have guessed the results. So we'll take a look. We're going to run a turbo on our combination with the truck Norris camshaft on it, and you'll see the turbo, and unlike the nitrous, which just adds to the combination, the blower kind of multiplies it, but you still have some losses associated with driving the blower, and the turbo basically just multiplies what's there. So if you have an NA combination with whatever camshaft you have, and it makes 300 horsepower, and then you run 14.7 pounds of boost, and now it makes 600 horsepower, because that's the way that the math works out. And I'm going to show you that the same camshaft that worked well NA, worked well when we added nitrous, and worked well when we added a blower, also works well when we had a turbo. So we're starting off with our same 5.3 liter, the L33, with our stock camshaft before we added our truck Norris camshaft, and we saw previously that this combination made 365 horsepower when we ran it on the engine dyno with the Holley and stuff on there, and 389 foot-pounds of torque. And again, here's what happened when we added our truck Norris camshaft. Jumped up to like 425 horsepower. 415 foot-pounds of torque, good gains everywhere. And then finally, here's what happened when we added our single turbo setup. And drum roll, you can see we made lots of power. Run with a single turbo and the truck NORRIS cam. The combination produced 633 horsepower and 625 foot-pounds of torque. This was at a peak boost of 7.3 psi. And for the guys that are interested, the combination on the turbo setup was we ran the truck exhaust manifolds, aimed them forward, had a custom Y pipe that I always use. It had two Turbo Smart wastegates on it, the 45 millimeter stuff. We had, as I said, the truck manifolds feeding that. We had an S475 T6 Summit Turbo. We had an air to water intercooler on it. We ran on E85. It had 21 degrees of timing at the horsepower peak, obviously less below that. We had 80-pound injectors. And so all of that worked out well. It was, you know, it was kind of a good setup. But at 7.3 psi, we made over 600 horsepower. It's kind of right where it should be. And the combination did well. But my point in all this is that whatever camshaft you have, if somebody tells you you need a dedicated turbo cam to run a turbo, or a dedicated blower cam to run a blower, or a dedicated nitrous cam to run nitrous, you don't. You can run nitrous on the camshaft that you have. You can run a blower on the camshaft that you have. You can run a turbo on the camshaft that you have. I just wanted to let you guys know. Armature holder, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. And I'll keep testing.